Diddy's rise to power was a tsunami of predacious tyranny that left behind multiple dead bodies and countless ruined lives in its wake. But before all that, Diddy was born in Harlem, New York on November 4th, 1969, to Melvin and Janice Combs. Diddy's father, Pretty Melvin, was a successful drug dealer in Harlem who owned a cab company he would use to distribute his narcotics throughout the city. Melvin was also a very close associate of Nicky Barnes and close friend of Frank Lucas. In fact, Pretty Melvin spent a lot of time at Frank Lucas's house and would often bring baby Diddy over to Lucas's house so his children could play with him. But everything would change for the Combs family in January 1972. The DEA would finally catch up to Pretty Melvin and place him along with everyone in his crew under arrest. But Melvin Combs would end up being released a few hours later while his entire crew remained incarcerated. You see, the DEA really wanted Frank Lucas, so Melvin had agreed to be an informant to avoid prosecution. Unfortunately for Melvin, the DEA was full of holes, and before he even walked out of that police station, Frank Lucas was already fully aware of his intentions. And the very moment Pretty Melvin stepped out of that precinct, his death clock had begun ticking. Then on January 26, 1972, Melvin's body would be discovered in his car with 2 gunshots to the back of his head. 99% of the time when people are talking about how or why Melvin Jones was killed, they usually say it happened during a drug deal gone wrong, but that's not what actually took place. Melvin Combs' execution-style murder was absolutely in retaliation for him becoming a rat. This would make Janice Combs a single mother to 2-year-old Diddy and his infant sister. All of this would lead to Janice Combs vowing to never let her children follow in the footsteps of their father. However, as Diddy grew up in Harlem, he became enamored with the drug dealers in the area just like a lot of other kids. But unlike other kids, it wasn't the possessions or the fancy cars that the drug dealers had that infatuated young Diddy. Instead, he was enamored with their power and their positions of authority. So Diddy decided at a very young age he knew exactly what he wanted out of life. He didn't necessarily know what he was going to do, but he knew he wanted to be in a position of power, where people would have to respect him and honor his authority. It was also around this point in time in Diddy's childhood where his mother began calling him Puffy, because whenever he got angry, he would puff up his chest.
Say it with your chest, little ass!
Now, Diddy's mom was fully aware of her son's obsession with the drug dealers in the streets. So when Diddy was 11 years old, Janice moved the family to Mount Vernon, New York, where she would enroll Diddy in a private prep school. Now, Diddy has always been a lot of different things, but lazy was never one of them. He was also very intelligent and extremely perceptive. He would utilize all of these traits to excel among his much more privileged peers. Diddy began to realize he didn't respond emotionally the same way as other kids did to certain situations. He realized things that made other kids feel guilty or sad had absolutely no effect on him. But he also knew that fitting in was paramount to his life goal of attaining power. So when Diddy was just a teenager, he began to mimic these emotions with his peers as a way to manipulate them to get something that he would want. In other words, Diddy was already a sociopath when he was just a teenager. But there was one emotion Diddy had in limitless supply, and that was anger. Diddy had a very difficult time controlling his anger and would often lash out violently or aggressively at very small things. Now, Diddy would also begin doing different things to earn money. His first job was delivering newspapers, and at just 14 years old, he was already buying his own clothes. He would eventually graduate high school in 1987 and began attending the prestigious Howard University, where he studied business administration. Diddy would almost immediately begin to stand out among his peers in college. He joined a fraternity and was known to throw the craziest, biggest parties on campus, often with thousands of people in attendance. And it was also during his freshman year of college when he started drinking pretty heavily. This would become an extreme problem later in life. And when Diddy was drunk, he had a very difficult time suppressing the emotions that he could handle while he was sober. In particular, his anger, where he would once again violently lash out at people for the smallest infractions. But at the same time, Diddy was still doing everything he could to earn as much money as possible and started a very successful cab service that would drive drunk people home after parties. Now, in the summer of 1989, while visiting Harlem, Diddy would run into a childhood friend, Dwight Myers, aka Heavy D. Heavy D's rap career was starting to take off and he had just signed a major deal with Uptown Records. And it was Heavy D who had introduced Diddy to the CEO of Uptown, Andre Harrell. And Andre Harrell would take a very special liking to Diddy, some would say almost too special. So at just 19 years old, Diddy was already introduced to the music industry at its highest level. Diddy absolutely loved everything about the inner workings of the music industry, and he was particularly in awe of the executives and their positions of power. And it wouldn't take long before Diddy finally realized what he could do to obtain his position of power in life. Diddy was going to become the CEO of a record label at any cost. But in the fall, Diddy needed to return to Howard University for his sophomore year. This was something Andre Harrell told him not to do and offered him a full-time position at the label, but Diddy's mom was 100% against it. So Diddy and Harrell came up with a compromise that twice a week Diddy would take a 4-hour train from DC to Harlem where he could continue working at Uptown as an intern. This meant Diddy was spending 16 hours a week on a train, and it would be during one of these return trips to Harlem when Diddy would make one of the most catastrophic mistakes of his entire life. In the service of accomplishing his dream of achieving ultimate power, Diddy would sacrifice the lives of 9 people. For the first time in his life, Sean Combs officially had blood on his hands. But in no way would it be the last. So at this point, Diddy's close relationship with Andre Harrell was starting to cause a lot of tension at Uptown Records. Nobody could understand why Harrell was playing favorites with Diddy so much and giving him opportunities that his peers had been in line for months. And of course, this would lead to the majority of his peers at Uptown really not liking him. Rumors about Diddy and Andre Harrell's relationship started to spread around the office. There was a lot more happening behind closed doors between Harrell and Diddy. But at the same time, Diddy was really starting to get a feel for the inner workings of the music industry and was granted the opportunity to work really closely with artists like Jodeci, Father MC, Heavy D, and a very talented up-and-coming R&B singer named Mary J. Blige. Something that really pissed off a lot of his peers at Uptown was when Diddy was given the opportunity to be in Stacey Lattisaw's music video for the song What You Need. This was also Diddy's very first appearance in a music video ever. But as time went on, Diddy's work was starting to suffer because he was being stretched too thin between school and working at Uptown Records. So on one trip from DC to Harlem, Andre Harrell once again offered Diddy a full-time position at the label. And this time, Diddy would make a decision that caused ripple effects that still permeate through the music industry to this day and lead to the deaths of nearly 20 people and the ruining of countless lives. Not only would Diddy agree to drop out of school and work at Uptown Records full-time, but Andre Harrell would give him a permanent position as an A&R and vice president of the record label, which was something that once again infuriated his peers at Uptown Records. Now, one of the very first things Andre Harrell would get Diddy to do was organize massive parties. He knew Diddy had a lot of experience doing this at college, and Diddy fell into the role really quickly. And it was at these parties that Diddy would start to run with the rougher crowd. He would meet and befriend Alpo Martinez. Alpo Martinez had just recently killed Rich Porter, so being seen with Alpo was a huge deal for Diddy. Diddy was able to manipulate Alpo Martinez into becoming his friend by utilizing a lot of the tactics he had developed as a teenager to fit in. Diddy's main goal in life was to obtain absolute power, so he was beginning to surround himself with as many important and powerful people as possible. And at this point, he was able to have a legitimate ally in power with Andre Harrell, and on the other side of the coin, in the criminal world, he was now close friends with Alpo Martinez. It was also around this time that Diddy had somehow come into the possession of a screenplay for a movie that was being done by his friend Ralph McDaniels. As Diddy read the screenplay, he began to closely identify with one of the characters in the film. Diddy would approach Ralph McDaniels and ask him if he could play the role in the movie. Ralph McDaniels quite literally laughed in his face. He couldn't believe that of all people, Diddy identified with this particular character in his movie. And of course, he would tell Diddy no and tell him the part had already been given to somebody else who was perfect for the role. So to Diddy, this person who had nothing to do with him and didn't even know he existed had just beaten him and taken something from Diddy that he really wanted. This infuriated him, and Diddy would form a grudge against this person and vow to get revenge against him at all costs. Now, that screenplay was for the movie Juice. The role that Diddy wanted to play was for Bishop, and the person who ended up getting the role was Tupac Shakur. Without even realizing it, Tupac had just made a very dangerous and capable enemy. Diddy didn't have much time to focus on Tupac Tupac at this point because he had much bigger problems on the horizon. Diddy's decision to drop out of school and work at Uptown Records full-time has brought us to the day of December 28th, 1991. We've arrived at City College, where Diddy's negligence was about to cause the deaths of 9 innocent people in one of the darkest days in New York City's history. Andre Harrell would decide to utilize Diddy's ability to throw massive parties by tasking him to hold a charity event somewhere in Harlem. Diddy would team up with longtime friend Heavy D and decide to throw a basketball game / concert for AIDS awareness at the historic City College in Harlem, New York. Diddy and Heavy D would utilize all of their connections by bringing in some of the most popular artists in the music industry and pop culture at that time. The list would include Mike Tyson, LL Cool J, members of New Edition and Boyz II Men. Of course, Heavy D was going to perform there along with Jodeci, members of Run DMC and Brand Nubian, along with Big Daddy Kane, DJ Red Alert, Ed Lover, Nice and Smooth, and it was going to be DJ'd by the most popular DJ in the city, Funkmaster Flex. Bringing in all of these stars was going to make this event massively popular, and the event was going to be held at Nat Holman Gym on City College's campus. The capacity at the gym where the event was being held was 2,700 people, so it was Diddy's responsibility to moderate the amount of tickets that were made and sold to make sure the event wouldn't go over capacity. And this would unfortunately be where everything would start to go terribly wrong. Tickets were being sold at multiple locations without anyone keeping track of how many were actually being sold. The event was being publicized like crazy all over the city. It was constantly being talked about on TV and in media and on radio broadcasts, which only served to increase the insane amount of tickets that were already being sold. Again, because Diddy was in charge of this event, he was 100% in charge of the moderation of ticket sales, and he would catastrophically fail at this responsibility. Diddy had already been made aware of the confusion surrounding the ticket sales and was presented with the opportunity to either cancel or reschedule the event in order to avoid potential disaster. Yes, it would have been a problem, but it was doable, and Diddy refused. Not only that, but Diddy had made a terrible decision to change security protocol at the last minute.
A Puff calls me, yo, G, I don't need y'all to do the security outside. I got the FOIs to do it. I told Puff right there and there, I say, Puff, somebody gonna die tonight. He said, Gene, don't worry about that.
And now we've arrived at the City College campus on December 28th, 1991. A member of the staff had already noticed a massive amount of people beginning to line up outside and realized something was very wrong. They would then place a phone call to one of the radio stations that had been publicizing the event and tell them what was going on. That's when, of all people, Wendy Williams would go on the air and tell people not to show up if they didn't have a ticket because it looked like the event could potentially get out of hand. But at this point, it was all too little, too late. Thousands of people were starting to show up, adding to the already massive number of the crowd. It became very clear to everyone involved with the event that something had gone very wrong, too many tickets had been sold, and way too many people were showing up for this event. People who hadn't even bought any tickets were showing up and were being allowed to purchase them while standing in line, which was something that really pissed off the people who had already purchased their tickets. People involved with Uptown Records began to approach Diddy and tell him too many people had showed up and the event needed to be canceled immediately. Diddy wouldn't hear it and would once again refuse to cancel the event. Diddy had neglected to organize a proper entrance plan for the celebrities, which meant the celebrities were having to use the exact same entrance as the crowd. And seeing all the celebrities showing up and going in was starting to make the crowd even more restless. At this point, they had already started to push past the insufficient security and make their way into the building. Now there's two entrances that needed to be utilized for the crowd to be able to make their way into the gym. First, there was a set of glass doors. Then after that, there was a hallway that led to a staircase that would lead people to a set of double doors that needed to be pulled open instead of pushed. This is where things would turn from chaotic to deadly. Things outside were beginning to go from bad to worse as the crowd was starting to get more out of control by the minute. Then Mike Tyson and LL Cool J would show up, causing all hell to officially break loose.
When LL Cool J and Mike Tyson showed up, that shit must have went pandemonium.
The restless and excited crowd began to rush into the building by the hundreds. The people at the front of the line were stuck up against the glass doors, and the people behind them continued to push. Eventually, they would shatter the glass doors and break through. That's when the stampede began to trample people who had fallen down. As people began to rush through the hallway and up the stairs to the set of double doors, they would encounter a deadly problem. Remember, those doors needed to be pulled open and not pushed. And with everyone rushing in, the unfortunate people at the front of the line were being crushed up against those double doors. This is where the lives of multiple people would end in the matter of a few minutes. At this point, chaos and confusion had taken hold. The stampede and crush was in full swing. In the pandemonium, dozens of people would be injured and 9 people would lose their lives, including a woman who was 8 months pregnant, who unfortunately lost her footing when being pushed from behind and would end up being trampled over by dozens of people who were just trying to rush to escape the chaos. Eventually, the police would arrive and began taking control of the situation while paramedics treated the injured. Now, as you can imagine, the fallout from this disaster was immense and dramatic. Countless lives would be ruined, families were broken, and bright futures would be destroyed before they had a chance to begin. An investigation would conclude that everyone involved with this event was in some way to blame for what happened. However, the lion's share of the blame clearly rested on Diddy's shoulders. Diddy would refuse to accept any responsibility at all for what happened. Diddy's peers at Uptown Records described his behavior afterwards as unbelievable. Diddy was very vocal about not feeling bad at all about what had happened. Instead, Diddy was visibly angry about what happened. Instead of sympathy for the victims, Diddy was upset that the event he had spent so much time on had gone so badly. The executives at Uptown Records had decided there was way too much bad publicity surrounding Diddy's name, and they would force Andre Harrell to fire his beloved protege from his position as vice president at Uptown Records. From the outside looking in, it appeared as though all of the hard work Diddy had done over the last few years to obtain more power was slipping from his fingertips. But what nobody knew was Diddy had been 2 steps ahead of everyone the entire time, and had secretly forged a relationship with someone who was about to make all of his dreams come true. Diddy was fired from Uptown Records in mid-1993, but the City College stampede occurred at the very end of 1991. But in between these two events, throughout the course of 1992, Diddy would have the most successful year of his career up to that point. Diddy was also beginning to forge lasting relationships with other people in high positions throughout the music industry. In particular, he would get very close with Russell Simmons throughout this point in time. Diddy was also continuing to work very closely with artists in the studio and got the reputation for having the magic touch. Every single project that Diddy would put his hands on would end up becoming successful to a certain degree. However, a lot of the executives at Uptown were getting really tired of Diddy's shit. He rarely listened and never did what they told him to do, or would do it a different way than the way that they told him to do it. Diddy was a constant source of confrontation with all of his superiors at Uptown Records. Time and time again, Andre Harrell would jump in and defend Diddy whenever he could. It seemed like Andre Harrell genuinely cared about Diddy, which makes what Diddy was doing in secret throughout this entire time period extremely f***ed up. Even at this young of an age, in his early 20s, he had already become the master of deception and a master manipulator. Then in the summer of 1992, his connections to the streets would pay off big time. Diddy would be given a mixtape from a Brooklyn drug dealer who was recently released from jail. Not only was Diddy floored by what he heard on this mixtape, but he believed he recognized the voice. Years before, Diddy had seen a teenager rapping in a video music box segment, and for some reason he felt a connection to this person and periodically would wonder whatever happened to that kid.
Oh, what's up? It's Video Music Box. DJ Rob McDaniels, right? What's up, man? Look in the sky and wonder why most MCs' alibis won't comply with my style of rhyme or rhyming or rap. It's not a trap. My rhyme just snap.
Video Music Box was done by his friend Ralph McDaniels, so Diddy would reach out to him to try to confirm whether or not these two people were the same person. And they most certainly were. The kid on Video Music Box was the same person from the mixtape, the notorious B.I.G.
See, they pop slugging like a colonel. They didn't realize that the beef
was eternal. Internal injury, that's what you're soon to see. B.I.G. keeps company, sometimes in my waist. If they come, I'm potent. Run upstairs, change my skimmer and my coat, and I'm floating to your punk part of town. Anybody frontin', they better duck down.
Diddy saw this as a sign of good fortune, so he worked quickly to get Biggie signed as fast as he could, and with the help of Andre Harrell would get the deal done and sign Biggie Smalls to Uptown Records within just a few days. At the time, Diddy was producing Heavy D's album, and he wanted to put Biggie to work as quickly as possible, which resulted in Biggie appearing on his very first ever song with Uptown Records.
When I hit you with the flow of death, I leave nothing left. I cook you up so quick, they call me Biggie Smalls and Chef. My burner's to my left, I'm not the type to fight. I'm blowing up quick like a stick of dynamite.
Later that year, both Biggie and Diddy would appear on Supercat's song Dolly My Baby, and this would be Diddy's very first ever appearance on a song, and he would just so happen to lay down one of the worst verses in hip-hop history.
Nah, who's it? Puff Daddy hops. Flick Cooper from the Cooper with mad props.
Not too long after, Diddy would produce the soundtrack for the movie Who's the Man, which would heavily feature a lot of up-and-coming artists from Uptown Records, once again including the notorious B.I.G. Meanwhile, all of this newfound success and attention Diddy was getting was starting to go to his head. It caused his arrogance to rise to an entirely new level, and only served to create more tension between Diddy and the executives at Uptown Records. Not only that, but Diddy's attitude following the City College stampede rubbed a lot of his peers at Uptown the wrong way. Diddy's inability to accept any responsibility for what happened or show any remorse for the victims resulted in him being alienated by the majority of his peers at the label. Even though Diddy had just had an incredible year and was achieving compound success at every turn, the decision was made by the executives at Uptown Records to terminate Diddy's contract and position as vice president at the label, and there was absolutely nothing Andre Harrell could do about it. Diddy's termination from Uptown Records appeared to greatly affect him at first. He hated losing more than anything, and he had just very publicly lost in an extremely embarrassing way. Not only that, but his enemies in high positions at Uptown Records had begun talking about him negatively to other executives in high positions at other labels in attempts to make sure he couldn't get a job anywhere else. These executives labeled Diddy as being not just hard to work with, but impossible to work with. And that's one of the worst distinctions you can have in the entertainment industry. It genuinely appeared that Diddy was finished in the music industry, but he had an ace up his sleeve. Diddy had recently been spending a lot of quality time with Andre Harrell's mentor, Clive Davis. And when I say the two of them were spending quality time together, I mean they were spending quality time together. Clive Davis was an extremely powerful individual in the music industry. He was the president and founder of Arista Records. Everybody thought Diddy was done for good, but they were all of them deceived. The Dark Lord Diddy had forged in secret a master label, and into this label he poured his cruelty, malice, and will to dominate all artists in the music industry. One label to rule them all. One label to find them. One label to bring them all.
In the darkness, find them.
Diddy was coming off of the most successful year of his career so far in 1992, but what nobody was aware of was he had already seen the writing on the wall as it pertained to his career at Uptown Records. He was fully aware of the fact that it was only a matter of time before the executives pushed him out of the label, which is what led Diddy into the early stages of setting up a contingency plan just in case. Then sometime in early 1993, Diddy would meet Clive Davis. Clive Davis was to Andre Harrell what Andre Harrell was to Diddy. When Andre Harrell was starting out in the music industry, Clive Davis would take him under his wing and turn him into his protege. And just like there were rumors surrounding Andre Harrell and Diddy's relationship, those same rumors were applied to the relationship between Clive Davis and Andre Harrell. And it was all because of Clive Davis that Andre Harrell was able to get his position as CEO at Uptown Records. Clive Davis was somebody who Andre Harrell trusted and respected immensely. However, unbeknownst to Harrell, his protege, who he also cared for tremendously, Sean Combs, had been going behind his back for months and had formed a very strong relationship with his mentor, Clive Davis. So when Diddy was fired from Uptown Records and decided to start his own record label, he turned to Clive Davis for help instead of Andre Harrell. Now in the power structure of the music industry, Clive Davis was near the very top, and he would give Diddy every single thing he needed to start his own record label. And I do mean everything: money, favors, influence, etc. And Andre Harrell felt extremely betrayed because Diddy had gone behind his back and formed this relationship with Davis.
And his mentor was
Andre Harrell, who was mentored by Clive Davis. What I do know is that Andre got passed over. Like, how do you go from being the president of Uptown and losing your entire company to your intern?
What makes matters worse is Clive Davis used his influence in the music industry to get a lot of the talented artists from Uptown Records released from their contracts so that they could sign with Diddy at Bad Boy Records. Diddy was really out here playing Game of Thrones in real life and had just made an incredible play for the crown of the music industry. Over the course of a couple of months, Diddy had gone from the doorstep of being blacklisted by the music industry to becoming the CEO of his own record label. And it was this incredible turnaround that won him the respect of a lot of the executives at other record labels that had been turned against him by the executives at Uptown Records. At just the age of 24, Diddy had already achieved the goal he had set for himself as a child and obtained the power he had coveted for so long. Diddy had lied, schemed, manipulated, and betrayed just to get to this point, leaving behind countless ruined lives and 9 dead bodies in his path to obtaining ultimate power. And if that's what it would take to achieve his dreams, then just what would Diddy be capable of to maintain them? The Bad Boy Records era had officially begun, and hip-hop would never be the same.
Clive Davis, in the beginning, he gave him power. And all he had to do was diddle-dee-dee and diddle-dee-dum.
At just the age of 24, Diddy had already made his dream of becoming powerful come true by becoming the CEO of his own record label. So at this point, he was really eager to find some artists and put them to work in the studio so that they could release some projects and get Bad Boy's name out there to new consumers. But at the time Diddy started Bad Boy, Clive Davis had yet to work his magic and get those artists released from their contracts at Uptown Records, which put Diddy in the position of proactively pursuing any new artist he could get his hands on. Diddy's connections to the streets would once again pay off big time when somebody brought an unknown artist from Long Island to Diddy so he could hear him freestyle. And this unknown artist was Craig Mack.
I come with the stupid type of bang that's more black than sniper getting everything you brand. From here to we back, the hot tech Max now on deck, looking for some wreck. And you can be a MC if you wanna, but you be a body bag type of MC lying in the corner.
Diddy was very impressed with what he heard out of Craig Mack, and he quickly signed him to Bad Boy, which would make Craig Mack Bad Boy Records' first ever artist. Craig Mack became Diddy's primary focus, and the two of them rapidly got to work on his album. But everything was about to change because Biggie was released from his contract at Uptown Records, and Diddy quickly signed him to Bad Boy. And out of the two artists, Diddy was well aware of the fact that Biggie was not only the more talented, but he was also the most likely of the two to become a superstar. But there was one aspect of Biggie that Diddy wasn't exactly super thrilled about, and that was Big's close relationship with Tupac Shakur. A while before Biggie joined Uptown Records, he and Tupac met and quickly became close friends. Not only that, but Tupac was solely responsible for teaching Biggie a lot about songwriting. What's even crazier is before Biggie was signed to Uptown Records, he was just about to join Thug Life. So despite what a lot of people have to say, Biggie and Tupac were in fact very close friends at one point in time. But as far as Diddy was concerned, he saw Tupac as a rival because he had held a grudge against him ever since he had won the role of Bishop in the movie Juice over Diddy. Now, as soon as Biggie joined Bad Boy, Craig Mack was no longer Diddy's primary focus. Not only that, but when Biggie was released from his contract with Uptown, he was also able to bring with him his completely finished album, Ready to Die. Now, Diddy had planned for Craig Mack's album to be the very first project Bad Boy Records ever released, until Biggie shows up with an already finished, better album than Craig Mack's album. So Diddy decides to go on ahead and release Biggie's album ahead of Craig Mack's. Then on September 13th, 1994, Ready to Die would officially be released. Then exactly 1 week later, on September 20th, 1994, Craig Mack would release his album, Project Funk the World. The singles from both of these albums were already performing exceptionally well. And when Diddy decided to remix one of Craig Mack's songs, Flavor in Your Ear, by putting Biggie along with other stars on it, it would end up boosting the sales of both of them. Two albums albums in a 7-day period, Bad Boy Records had officially arrived. But over at Bad Boy Records, things weren't exactly sunshine and rainbows. From the moment Biggie joined the label, Diddy started treating Craig Mack like absolute shit. And Biggie didn't get along with Craig Mack at all, which is crazy because Biggie was one of those people who just seemed to get along with everyone. And I can't definitively tell you the reason why Biggie didn't like Craig Mack. I've found things that said it was just Diddy stirring up competition between his artists, or making sure his artists didn't become friends so they wouldn't later join up and leave the label when they found out their contract sucked. Other people said Biggie just thought he was whack and didn't want to with them. All I can tell you for sure is there was tremendous tension between Craig Mack and Diddy and Craig Mack and Biggie.
I don't fuck with that.
You don't fuck with Craig. I noticed, like, on the remix, Flavor in Your Ear, y'all worked
That
together.
was just something I had to do. You know what I'm saying? That's politics. Puff asked me to do it. I did it. I don't fuck with that.
Now is when we need to pump the brakes a little bit and take a trip to Atlanta, Georgia. L.A. Reid, who has been exposed as a predator himself, had just discovered a 13-year-old boy singing at a talent show and signed him to Arista Records. Things between Arista Records and this 13-year-old kid weren't going well at all, and they were planning on releasing him from his contract. The kid would end up begging L.A. Reid not to cut him from his contract and said he would do anything to make this situation work. That's when, for some reason, L.A. Reid came up with an idea to send this 13-year-old boy to New York City to live with Diddy for a year so he could attend something called Puffy's Flavor Camp. Now, a lot of you have been asking, when do we get to the legend of the diddler? When are we going to start talking about the diddler? Be careful what you wish for because we're there, and the first person who ever attended Puffy's Flavor Camp was a 13-year-old Usher Raymond.
I think Puffy would say, man, you gotta chill, like you just a little bit too intense. You know, you gotta relax. I'm not here to party with you. I don't wanna go to the clubs. Matter of fact, I'm too young to even be in here. Why you got me in clubs?
So a teenage Usher Raymond has just been sent to New York City to live with Diddy for a year so he can attend something called Puffy's Flavor Camp. On its surface, Puffy's Flavor Camp is kind of a mentor program where young, inexperienced, or struggling artists can go to live with Diddy for a while so he can help better develop them as artists. And while that does appear to be one aspect of what's going on, allegedly there's a whole lot more going on than just that.
Called Puffy Flavor Camp.
There you go.
To learn some...
Flavor Camp!
Yeah, that's what it was called.
I was curious. I got a chance to see some things.
Yeah, but you were 13. What were you saying?
I went there to see the lifestyle.
Right.
And I saw it.
You're a dad now. Would you ever send your kid to Puffy Camp?
Hell no.
The most notable attendees of Puffy's Flavor Camp just happened to be Justin Bieber and Usher Raymond, who both lived with Diddy for a period of time when they were teenagers. There's also been people who have come forward during the times that people were attending Puffy's Flavor Camp and said that they witnessed these young artists in precarious situations. Associates of Kim Porter say that she had videotapes of these situations, which potentially played a role in her untimely death. And apparently when Usher returned home from his time at Puffy's Flavor Camp, he was a completely different person. Every single parent of every single kid who went to Puffy Flavor Camp 100% failed to protect their children. Now, Diddy was responsible for producing Usher's first album while he was at Puffy Flavor Camp, and the two would go to Los Angeles to film a music video. And that's where Diddy would meet and befriend Los Angeles gangster Keffe D. This alliance with Keffe D meant Diddy had strong connections on the West Coast, which is something we need to put in the back of our minds for right now. Jumping back to New York City around the same time that Biggie, Diddy, and Craig Mack were enjoying all the new success of Bad Boy Records, Tupac Shakur had found himself mixed up in some very serious shit. Around that same exact time, Tupac had been locked in a months-long feud with notorious New York City gangster Haitian Jack. Tupac and Haitian Jack originally met on the set of Above the Rim and were actually friends at first. The two would party together all the time and regularly attended nightclubs throughout New York City. Things went bad between Tupac Shakur and Haitian Jack after Tupac, Haitian Jack, and two others were arrested for assault. Tupac always professed his innocence and kinda pointed the finger at the other suspects in the case, including Haitian Jack.
So where are those people that did this? They were all in the same hotel as me. They were all right in the same room with me. Why am I the only one in court right now? Why is the cameras all on me? And in the report, in all these charges, I didn't do nothing. Well, where they at? Why me? I don't want nobody else to go to jail. You know what I'm saying? But I don't want to go to jail for something I didn't do.
And this was something that pissed off Haitian Jack to an extreme degree. Haitian Jack was to killers what Diddy was to predators. He was quite literally surrounded by them. Just like 50 Cent, Tupac was about to learn a terrible lesson the hard way. When you piss off a killer, the consequences are deadly. Now, one of Haitian Jack's associates was somebody who was friends with Diddy, a man named Jimmy Henchman. And at the time, Jimmy Henchman had been using Pac to record features for some of his artists. And at some point, Biggie must have overheard something from Diddy, Jimmy Henchman, and Haitian Jack because he would warn Tupac to stay the hell away from Jimmy Henchman. Biggie told Tupac if he pages you, ignore it. If he calls, don't answer. And if he tells you to be somewhere at a certain time, do not go. But at the time, Tupac was in a very precarious situation financially. He needed as much money as possible for his legal defense so he wouldn't go to prison for his assault case, which meant Tupac would pretty much take every opportunity he could when he was offered a feature. Then one day, Jimmy Henchman repeatedly paged Tupac. Tupac would call him back, and Jimmy Henchman told him he would give him $7,000 to do a feature for one of his artists, but Tupac had to do it at Quad Studios. Completely ignoring the warning from his close friend, the notorious B.I.G., Tupac agreed to go to Quad Studios to record a verse for one of Jimmy Henchman's artists, which brings us to the night of November 30th, 1994. When Tupac Shakur walked into the Quad Studios on the night of November 30th, 1994, he had no idea what was waiting for him. He was summoned there by somebody who was a close associate of Diddy and Haitian Jack, a man named Jimmy Henchman. In the weeks leading up to this moment, Jimmy Henchman had employed Tupac Shakur multiple times to record features for his artists. When looking back on that in hindsight, it's very clear Jimmy Henchman was only using Tupac for those features so that he could later bait him into a trap. In the weeks leading up to the shooting, Jimmy Henchman, Diddy, and Haitian Jack had been seen together multiple times. Then of course there's the infamous warning Biggie gave to Tupac telling him to stay away from Jimmy Henchman and Haitian Jack. That serves as another indication of Diddy's potential involvement, because at some point Biggie must have overheard something between Diddy, Haitian Jack, and Jimmy Henchman. Now, prior to Tupac's arrival at Quad Studios, Diddy, Jimmy Henchman, and Andre Harrell were all upstairs along with Biggie and the members of Junior Mafia. Biggie actually wanted to use Tupac for a feature on one of Junior Mafia's songs, so he told Lil C's to go out on the balcony and keep an eye out for Tupac and to tell him when he got there, so Biggie could go downstairs and talk to Tupac about it then. Meanwhile, Diddy was acting very uncharacteristically. He seemed nervous and was pacing around. He kept going out to the balcony and looking down, then turning around and going back inside, where he'd go back in and sit down with Andre Harrell and Jimmy Henchman, and the three would begin whispering.
The people who knew what was going to happen to Pac in the part of the Quad Studio with Jimmy Henchman, and that was Andre Harrell and Puffy. So Puff knew. Andre Harrell knew.
Not only that, but Diddy had called Tupac on his cell phone multiple times, asking him where he was and when he thought he was going to arrive. This bizarre behavior by Diddy would once again surface a few years later on the day of March 8th, 1997. Eventually, everyone heard Lil C's shouting down from the balcony. Tupac Shakur had arrived. Biggie told Lil C's and Nino Brown to go downstairs and meet Tupac. That's when Diddy jumped up from his chair and told them not to go and to wait for Tupac to come upstairs and meet them. But they didn't listen to Diddy and instead got in the elevator and started going down to the lobby. And it was that exact moment that Tupac entered Quad Studios, walking directly into a trap. When Lil C's and Nino Brown reached the lobby and the elevator doors opened, they were confronted by two armed men who pushed them back into the elevator. The two men then turned to the approaching Tupac Shakur and began trying to rob him. Of course, Tupac fought back, and then Tupac Shakur would be shot 5 times, twice in the head, twice in the groin area, and once in the hand. The two men grabbed Tupac Shakur's jewelry and then fled the scene. That's when onlookers immediately ran to Tupac Shakur's aid. The police and paramedics would then arrive and begin treating Tupac Shakur for his injuries. A shaken Biggie Smalls watched on as they loaded a bullet-ridden Tupac Shakur onto the stretcher and began carrying him out of the building. And for a brief moment, Tupac and Biggie would lock eyes. That's when Tupac Shakur would raise his arm and flip Biggie off as they loaded him into the ambulance and shut the doors. Shocked and confused, Biggie wondered if that was going to be the last time he'd ever see his friend alive. Now, the thing about wars is they often start before anybody even realizes it. And in the case of the East Coast versus West Coast war, first blood had just been spilled, and nothing would ever be the same for anyone involved.
We need
medical to expedite. We need medical to expedite. He's got a shot victim. We need to extradite the victim out of the car ASAP.
If you want your friend to live, we're gonna send a paramedic to you pull over.
It's one shot. Okay, they drove up next to us and just shot us the car on the passenger side. Okay. Take a left, man. Big, you hear me, baby? Yo, just go ahead, man. Go straight, yo.
Tupac Shakur's attempted in the lobby of Quad Studios was a watershed moment in hip-hop and a precursor to the East Coast-West Coast war that was to come. Tupac Shakur would survive the attempt on his life and began piecing together things that had gone down over the past few months and would eventually come to the conclusion that Bad Boy Records was in some way responsible for what happened to him. He especially felt betrayed by Biggie, who felt like the warning he gave him was too vague. Instead, he felt like Biggie should have told him that his life was in danger. Of course, Diddy would deny any involvement at all in what happened to Tupac, even though all the evidence that's accumulated over the years definitely says otherwise. Nevertheless, the beef was definitely on. Making matters worse, Diddy persuaded Biggie to release a song that he originally took off his album. In February 1995, the Notorious B.I.G. would release the song Who Shot Ya? Of course, Tupac immediately saw this as a diss track aimed right at him. However, that's not exactly true. Remember, Biggie recorded Ready to Die when he was still signed to Uptown Records in 1993, and actually recorded Who Shot Ya back then with Keith Murray on the second verse.
I burn, baby, burn like disco inferno. Burn slow like blunts with yayo. Peel more skins than Idaho potato. No, the lyrical is taking place. Fucking with Biggie Smalls, it ain't safe.
But at some point, Diddy and Biggie went back into the studio and re-recorded the song, removing Keith Murray and adding Biggie to the second verse and putting ad-libs by Diddy that said East Coast and 9-5. So regardless of Bad Boy's intention, Who Shot Ya would only serve to fuel the flames of a simmering beef. Which brings us to February 3rd, 1995. The annual Source Awards were being held in New York City with both Bad Boy and Death Row in attendance, and that's when this happened.
Any artists out there want to be an artist and want to stay a star, won't have to worry about the executive producer trying to be all in the videos, all on the record, dancing. Come to Death Row.
The East Coast ain't got no love for Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg and Death Row. Y'all don't love us. Y'all don't love us!
And it was crystal clear that Suge Knight's comments were aimed at Diddy. Then on September 23rd, 1995, things would only continue to spiral out of control. Diddy, along with other members of Bad Boy, were in Atlanta, Georgia, celebrating Jermaine Dupri's birthday at a nightclub when the event was crashed by Suge Knight and Death Row. This resulted in multiple brawls breaking out and everyone was kicked out of the club. Then while outside, things calmed down and both sides came to a short truce. That's when everybody's attention was turned across the street because they heard shots firing. It turned out to be somebody just shooting in the air. But while everyone's attention was across the street, shots would ring out right beside them. Everybody would hit the ground as the gunman fled into the shadows. Eventually, everybody would return to their feet except for one person. It would turn out that Suge Knight's best friend had just been shot and killed. It was later discovered that it was a member of Bad Boy security who pulled the trigger. The East Coast-West Coast war just had its first casualty. Not long after, Tupac was released from prison and he would immediately head to the studio. And that's where he would record one of the most disrespectful diss tracks in hip-hop history, Hit 'Em Up. 1996, once again at the Soul Train Awards, as members of Bad Boy were on stage performing, Death Row showed up rolling hundreds of people deep. This caused everyone from Bad Boy to quite literally run for their lives. This incident extremely embarrassed Diddy, who immediately got to work on plotting revenge on Death Row Records. Now remember when I said this? Keefy D. This alliance with Keefy D meant Diddy had strong connections on the West Coast, which is something we need to put in the back of our minds for right now. Just one night after the Soul Train Awards, Diddy would meet with Keefy D and offered him $1 million to kill either Tupac or Suge Knight.
And he tells Keefy D, man, I just need you to take care of this situation with Suge and Tupac.
Keefy, he's claiming that Puffy offered him $1 million to kill Suge or Tupac?
Both of them. Yeah, both their names came out.
Tupac Shakur's death clock was now ticking, which brings us to the night of September 7th, 1996.
Rapper Tupac Shakur was shot here in Las Vegas.
The rapper was shot inside of a BMW while stopped at a red light on Koval and Flamingo.
On September 7th, 1996, after attending a Mike Tyson fight in Las Vegas, Nevada, Tupac Shakur would be shot 4 times while sitting at a red light in a car with Suge Knight. Tupac Shakur was immediately taken to a hospital where he spent the next 5 days fighting for his life, but would eventually succumb to his injuries.
Complications from several bullet wounds sustained Saturday night, September 7th. He was 25 years old.
As soon as news of the shooting made its way back to New York City, Diddy would call Keffe D and ask him, "Was this us?" And of course, we all know the answer to that question, which meant now Diddy needed to pay Keffe D $1 million. Diddy would then give the check to somebody he trusted to facilitate the transaction, and that check would end up being seen by numerous people. However, the person Diddy handed that check to was a shady who ended up cashing the check himself and stealing all the money. Now the crazy thing is, because that check never made its way to Keffe D's hands, the FBI had no tangible evidence of Diddy's involvement.
Yes.
And Zip was supposed to give the money to Keffe in that.
Yes.
But he never gave the money to him.
But thank God he never gave him the money, right? Think about it. If he gave the money, Puffy would be in prison now, a murder for hire. So thank God. It's just a true story. If he would have gave them the money, it would have been a murder for hire and Puffy would be locked up.
That is literally the only reason Diddy was never implicated in the death of Tupac Shakur. Now, not only was Tupac Shakur killed, but Suge Knight being in Las Vegas violated his probation, which meant he got arrested and sent to prison for 8 months. In one fell swoop, all the competition was gone, and Bad Boy Records sat atop the throne of the music industry. But all was not well in the Bad Boy family. Biggie kept running out of money and didn't understand why. And for the very first time, Biggie had somebody take a close look at his contract. That's when he discovered that the person he trusted most in the world had been him the entire time.
He said, "I'm broke." I said, "Yeah, you broke, man." "Yo, how you know that?" I said, "Talk and run their mouth big."
Biggie would approach Diddy and ask him to have his contract restructured. And with a demeanor so cold it actually shocked Biggie, Diddy told Biggie he could only get a new contract if he fulfilled all the obligations of his current contract. Biggie decided to handle all the obligations of his current contract, and then he was gonna leave Bad Boy Records. Now initially, Biggie signed a 4-album deal, and the entire reason Life After Death was a double album was because Biggie was trying to speed run through the rest of his contract. Things between Biggie and Diddy got tense quickly. Not only that, but Big was having a difficult time finishing songs because he had just lost his passion for anything related to Bad Boy.
You've been writing this song for like 30 days now. So it should be kind of hard, you know what I'm saying? I got a lot of stuff on your mind, you know what I'm saying? You've been writing this song for like 30 days. There ain't no excuse for that. But too much balling, enjoying yourself, you know. Really got nothing to do with that.
Not only that, but his focus wasn't primarily on Bad Boy Records, he was also trying to get another contract with someone else. Things started to look really good for Biggie's future after he was drafted a contract with Rockefeller Records worth well over $60 million that multiple people saw.
Look at this. I think the contract was for so many years for like 62 million. It comes out to like $62 million.
Biggie was leaving Bad Boy. It was 100% going to happen, and there's no way that Diddy didn't know. Diddy hates losing, and he was on the verge of losing his biggest cash cow, so he decided something needed to be done. Then in March 1997, Diddy somehow talked Biggie into going to LA. At first, Biggie didn't want to go at all. He was recovering after a car accident where he broke his femur, so traveling was very uncomfortable for him. Not only that, but Biggie had shows booked in London that he really wanted to do.
Biggie didn't want to go to LA. He may not have wanted to go to London, but was talked into it. First time ever a rapper of your stature getting this treatment. That would be something he would be interested in doing.
Now, everyone always says Diddy was able to talk Biggie into going to LA, but they never really say exactly how. Part of Biggie's contract stipulated that he had to provide multiple features for Diddy's album, which was being recorded in LA. So the main reason Biggie went to LA was so he could check another box off his contract and get him one step closer to leaving Bad Boy Records. Biggie reluctantly agreed to go to LA with Diddy, and his death clock was now ticking. Now, while Biggie was in LA, he did a few media appearances, but his primary focus was those features, so he would spend the majority of his time in the studio. Meanwhile, the same bizarre behavior people had noticed out of Diddy on the night of Tupac's attack at Quad Studios had once again resurfaced. And it was clear to everyone around that Diddy was acting very strange. Meanwhile, Biggie would finish all of his required features for Diddy's extremely distastefully named album, No Way Out. And the last verse Biggie would ever record was for the song Victory.
We got this shit mapped tight, brass knuckles and flashlights, the heaters and the two-seaters with 2 meters, senoritas, kiss rings when you meet us.
Which brings us to the day of March 8th, 1997. Biggie was trying to leave and go to London, but Diddy wasn't letting him. Diddy was trying to convince Big to stay that night for the vibe party and then he could leave for London in the morning. And unfortunately for Biggie, he would once again concede and decide to go to the vibe party. Meanwhile, all day long, Diddy had ignored numerous threats that their lives were in danger that night.
Puff, I got some intel. The guys are coming to kill us tonight at the museum party. He said, Gene, I don't want to hear that shit. He said, you ain't got to go if you don't want to go.
But then everybody ended up going to the vibe party anyway and had a really good time. That was until the fire department came in and shut the place down and sent everybody spilling out into the street. Which brings us to the early morning hours of March 9th, 1997. In the early morning hours of March 9th, 1997, the notorious B.I.G. would be gunned down shortly after leaving the vibe party, which was being held at the Peterson Auto Museum in Los Angeles, California. The notorious B.I.G. would end up dying as he was being rushed to the hospital by his friends.
I'm John Norris with an MTV News breaking story. We're outside of Peterson's Automotive Museum in Los Angeles, where the 24-year-old rap artist known as Notorious B.I.G., Christopher Wallace, was shot early Sunday morning and later died of gunshot wounds.
Now, just as Diddy's behavior was peculiar leading up to this moment, his behavior after leaving the vibe party would be just as strange and caused a lot of the people who were closest to the situation to wonder just what the he was doing, leaving the majority of them to question his actions in hindsight.
I've never seen him act like this ever, because he don't act like that. So Puff is like looking, and if you see the cameras, you see him running back and forth, looking and everything like that.
Now, with both Biggie and Tupac being dead and Suge Knight being in prison, the East Coast versus West Coast war had just come to a shocking conclusion, leaving Diddy as the last man standing, ultima hombre. Diddy would immediately begin playing the role of a grieving man who just lost his best friend in an extremely traumatic way. But whenever Diddy did these interviews, he made sure to leave out the parts about Biggie discovering he was locked in a terrible contract, that Diddy would refuse to restructure for Biggie, or that the two were barely even speaking and Biggie was proactively trying to leave Bad Boy Records. However, Diddy would use every opportunity to use Biggie's death to his full advantage. And just 2 weeks after Biggie was killed, Diddy would release Biggie's album, Life After Death, on March 25th, 1997. The album would see immediate success and rocketed straight to #1, making it Bad Boy Records' first ever #1 album. Not long after, Diddy would release one of the most blasphemous songs in hip-hop history. It was a tribute song to the best friend who wanted absolutely nothing to do with him, featuring the wife who betrayed his trust and slept with his best friend turned biggest enemy. Of course, I'm talking about I'll Be Missing You. Now, there's a couple issues with this song that not a lot of people point out. He was able to make the entire song itself with all the mixing, mastering, and recording. Then he was somehow able to make an extremely elaborate music video, which required complex planning and storyboards, permit filing, filming, editing. Then whenever the music video is finished, it needs to be distributed. All of these things typically take months upon months to get done. Yet somehow the music video for I'll Be Missing You managed to make it to BET and MTV and other music video publications on the week of May 11th, 1997, just 2 months after Biggie died. It is extremely possible that the remembrance song that Diddy made for his dead best friend was already planned before Biggie died. Then on July 22nd, 1997, Diddy would release his debut album, No Way Out, a title that I'm sure had absolutely nothing to do with Biggie trying to leave the record label. The album would shoot straight to #1, making it the second #1 album in Bad Boy's history. At just the age of 27, Diddy had already made every one of his dreams come true and accomplished every single goal he ever had. He was CEO of his own record label, which also just so happened to be the hottest label in the music industry. He was an accomplished producer who would work with the hottest acts in the music business. He was a popular socialite and media personality with countless popular and influential friends, and now on top of everything else, a #1 recording artist. Diddy's treacherous rise to fame was officially complete, leaving behind countless ruined lives in his path. However, Diddy was far from finished destroying people's lives, but that's a story for another time.
me know another ground, baby.
Okay, all right. Let me see how I'm gonna hit you with. You wanna set it off?
Yeah, I'm scared to do some freestyle. I'm scared to do some freestyle. Flow, I'm too high and I might go off tempo.